SSRS and .NET programming. Up until this point, we've been accessing all of our reports through the web URL. We would go to the local host and the port number /reports, and we could see everything through there. Well, in the real world, there will be times when you need to access reports in a different fashion. For example, you might need to programmatically access reports or grab metadata about the reports, or manage things such as subscriptions or schedules to take snapshots. Well, in this nugget, we're going to talk about the SOAP API. It's a web programming interface that allows us to communicate with our reporting service. Once we have the generated code, then we can use this API within whatever programming environment we want to. For example, we might have a standalone console application that uses the API, or we might have a forms program that accesses it, or we might even have a web page that does the same. Regardless of what you're using, it's always going to be the same API. So we'll do an example of a couple SSRS management features, such as taking a snapshot programmatically. And then we're also going to embed reports using URL access. So this is where you can have a web page or some other program and you can pull in the actual report. Instead of using a web service, you're going to point to a particular URL. It's going to save on performance and memory. And then the last thing we'll take a look at is actually embedding .NET code inside of your reports. So if you want to have dynamic behavior, such as dynamically making the background color of a field a different color depending on what value is in there, you can do that pretty easily. So in the example I'm going to show you, we're going to create our own custom function and then call that function from our cell. There will be times when you want to tap into your reporting services using the .NET framework instead of using the browser. One example might be you can script tapping into a report and then take that script and place it in an SSIS task. Now we use web services to communicate between the .NET framework and the reporting services. A web service is really just a reusable component with an interface, and then there's an implementation behind that actually provides the communication. The actual communication on the wire is going to be SOAP over HTTP, but we don't have to understand all of the low-level details. All we need to do is have access to the interface and then use that interface within our .NET program. So what I'm going to do right now is open up Visual Studio.NET. I'm actually using Visual Basic. You're not limited to that. You can also use Visual C# if you want to. And if you don't have that development environment, you can always go to Microsoft's website and do a free trial download of Visual Basic. So what I have right now are no projects open. We're going to create a new project. So we'll just go into here and we'll say New Project. And let's just make this a console application. So in our example here, we're going to have a console application that uses the web service to communicate with the reporting service. If you want to create, for example, a Windows Forms application, you can do that. You can even create an ASP web page that uses the web service. But let's choose console application for simplicity's sake. Okay, so I'll just call this Web Service App. Doesn't really matter what you call it. And now we're going to add a web service reference. Essentially what this is we're including the interface so we can actually use the web services. So just highlight this and go into Project, and you're going to say Add Service Reference, and then make sure you go down to Advanced right here so you can specify that you want to add a web reference. Okay, so it asks us for a URL in here, and the URL is going to be your server name. So I'm using 127.0.0.1, otherwise known as localhost, or you can put the domain name in there, followed by the port number. So for you, it's probably going to be port 8080 if you haven't changed it from the default, /report server /report service 2005.asmx. Yes, you need to put 2005 instead of 2008. It's there for backwards compatibility. So what this URL is, it's really just a reference to a web services description language file which contains all the meta information about the web services. In fact, if I take that URL and I plug it into a web browser, you'll see a WSDL document, Web Services Description Language document. It looks like this. So here we just have some descriptions. I usually read my WSDLs from the bottom up, and you'll see right down here it gives us the SOAP address, and then as you scroll up you can see what the different operations are. So just look for operation tags. So here we have a operation called regenerate model, we have another operation called generate model, and so on. So it contains all the different methods that we can invoke. Okay, so now that you do that, go ahead and hit the Go button. And I'm going to type in my password right there. And it told us that it found one service called Report Service 2005. And the web reference name is going to be the name that you provide in your actual code. You can call this anything you want to. It sometimes takes a few seconds for this to render. Be patient. And eventually you get something like this. So you can see all the different methods that are available to you. For example, you can create a folder, you can create a linked report, create a model, create a report, and so on. If you scroll down a little bit, you see all sorts of get methods. And then there's a very common method we use is called list children, and you pass in a string path and a recursive as Boolean, so pass in true or false. This will give you a list of the items in your environment. We're actually going to be using that one in just a moment. So when you call these methods, it actually calls the web services, and the low-level details that are happening behind the scenes, you don't know and you don't care how that is actually implemented. That's the beauty of web services. So I'm going to rename this to be called My Service. And then we'll add the reference, and you'll see that it's now added right in here. In fact, if you double-click on My Service, you can then go to your object browser, and if you expand this a little bit, you can see all the different variables and methods available to you. Now that we have the web reference in there, we can then go to this empty module right here, and we can start coding. So I'm going to do an import statement in here. I'll say imports, and then here's my web service app dot my service. Okay, so now that we import that, we can then start coding in here. I'm going to declare a variable in here. I'm going to call this rs, and I'll say dim rs equals new reporting service 2005. And now we can set the credentials to be the same credentials as our current environment. So I can just say rs dot credentials equals system dot net dot credential cache dot default credentials. So now I'm going to declare a variable that represents all of the items in my environment. Items can be data sources, reports, models, and so on. Okay, so I can go in here and say dim items as catalog item. Put parentheses right there. At this point, we can call the list children method to return all of the items. So here I'm going to say items equals rs dot list children. List children takes two arguments. The first argument is the path. So if I want to start at the very root, I'll just do a /. That takes us to home. And then if I want to do a recursive search, then I'll say true. If I only want to see the direct children at the root, then I would say false. Now that we have that array of items, we can loop through them. So here I'll just do a for each statement. So I'll say for each I in items, and there we have our loop. I just represents the individual item in our array. So if we just want to splash the information to the console, we can do a console.writeLine. And then pass in the i.path. i.path gives the full path, whereas i.name just gives the base name. It's a little more descriptive to use the path. Now the last thing I'm going to do right outside of this for loop is I'm going to do a console.readLine, and that's just going to prevent the console from disappearing after we see the results. So at this point we can go ahead and run this. And here's our console. In a second we'll get some results here. And there we go. So we have data sources right here. Looks like we have 2 data sources, and then we have several reports in here as well. If you want to see the same thing through the web interface, you can. Here's my web interface, and you'll see here we have data sources, reports review, and sales info. If I drill down to data sources, we have the exact same information. The only difference is our interface. So that is the way we programmatically extract information about our items. Let's kill this window. I want to look at some other things we can do here. What you can do is just rely on auto-completion to see what your different options are. So if we just scroll down a little bit, if we do an rs dot, you'll see all of your different options here. And I'm going to choose list subscriptions. And if you actually click on this, you can see what parameters it takes as well as what it returns. So you'll see that the first parameter is the report name as a string. The second argument is the owner as a string. And you can set those to null or nothing. And what that does is it pretty much serves as a wildcard. In other words, if we pass in nothing and nothing, then it will show us every single subscription regardless of the ownership or the report name. If we take another closer look, we can look at the return data type as well. So you'll see that the return data type is subscription with parentheses, which means it's an array. Okay, so I'm just going to create an array. I'll just say dim subscriptions as subscription, and make sure I put parentheses right there. The other thing I'm going to do is just do a simple print statement. And the other thing I'm going to do here is just put a simple print statement that says that we're listing the subscriptions. So I'll just say console.writeLine and do this. So now that we've defined that, we're going to call rs.listSubscriptions, passing in nothing and nothing, and it returns this guy right here. Okay, so now that we did that, we can go through a loop and display the subscription information. So I'll just say for each, and I'll call my variable s. S represents the individual subscription in subscriptions. There's our next keyword, and now we can splash information to the screen. So console.writeLine, and here I can say s dot. Let's display the owner and concatenate to that, maybe a colon, concatenate to that, s dot. Let's grab the path, and then add another couple spaces, and then add to that when it was last executed. So s dot last executed. Okay, so now we can run this. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and let's take a look at our results. Okay, so it looks like we have one subscription here. It's owned by Julie. The Julie1 there is the domain name. And the full path of the report that this is corresponding to is reports review / sales by region. And the last time it was executed was on the 15th at 2 a.m. Let's say that you programmatically wanted to update a snapshot. Well, you can also do that through this interface. So what you're going to do, let's just go ahead and open up a new line right here. You'll see that if I say rs dot, there's an update report execution snapshot. And it only takes one argument, and that's the full path to the report. Okay, so I'm just going to hit my tab right there and pass it in. The name of it is Reports Review / Sales by Region. Make sure we have our initial slash right here. And if you're not sure what the name is, remember you can always run this script and see the listing of all your reports. So right now it happens to be 9:27 in the morning on my local machine. So I'm going to run this, and then we're going to view it in our environment. Okay, so there's no confirmation because I didn't program that in there. However, if I kill this window and then we go to our web interface, okay, here I can go to my home. We can go to our reports review, and you'll see here that the last run was at 9:27 a.m. Typically, this web service interface is used for management functions. So you can do things such as list your subscriptions, list your reports. You can even create schedules, modify schedules, delete schedules. There's over 100 different methods available to you. If you go to Microsoft's website, they have full documentation as to what parameters each one of those functions take. Now, if you want to do something such as embed a report inside of an application, such as a web application, that's easy to do as well. However, since the web service interface can suck down a lot of memory, we don't typically use that to display our reports within a web browser. So let me show you how to use the URL access to grab reports. You'll see that if we drill down to sales by region, we can see the actual report right in this environment here. What I don't like, however, is all this garbage at the top. What I'd like to do is take this report and embed it inside of another web page minus all this stuff up here. So I'm just going to open up a text editor, and I'd like to show you how you can create different URLs. I've actually created a web page already, and this is actually directly under my C drive. And so what we see right here is actually an HTML page with two frames in it. We have a left side navigation frame, so the source code for that is going to be nav.html, and the source code for the main frame, for the right hand side frame, is going to be this URL right here. So let's focus in on this URL. This looks familiar, right? We have our 127.0.0.1, then the port number, then report server. You can drill down to pages, report viewer, and so on, and what we need to pay attention to is the question mark at the end here. After the question mark, you'll see that it says sales info, region cities, and so on. So every URL that you build has certain components to it, and they have different meanings. So the %2 just represents a slash. So imagine that there's a slash right there. And if we were to actually plug this URL directly into a browser, you can see what you get right here. I'll just open up a new window right here and plug it in. And you'll see here that we have a report without all that stuff at the top. And so what we can do with our HTML code is that you'll notice that these two frames have names. The one on the left-hand side is nav. The one on the right-hand side is called M for main. If we take a look at our nav.html web page, you'll see here that we have some links, ahref equals, and then the various links. So this will display one link for the regions report, another link for sales territories, and another link for customers. And all of these URLs have very similar syntax. It's drilling down to the particular report. I want you to take a look at one of the options that you can provide. If you look at this second link that I created, we said format equals, and you can specify that it's an image, and you'll see what happens when we load this. So I'm just going to open up a web page right here, and we're going to navigate. We'll just open up. We're going to go to mypage.html. So here you have regions, standard report. If we click on sales territories, you'll see that it's prompting us to open up with some kind of file. And the reason why is we specified it's going to be an image. So we can say, you know what, go ahead and open this up with Windows Photo Gallery. And you'll see now that this is the result. It actually created an image for you. So you're not just limited to HTML output. I also want to show you down here that the customers report takes a parameter. You can pass parameters in through the URL if you want to. We just use the ampersand and then the customer key followed by an equal sign. We can go to our source code right down here. Take this whole thing right here, we can copy it, and let's just paste it directly into the browser. It's prompting us for the customer key. If we decide to tack onto the end, we do an ampersand cust key equals 18866. See how we can pass these parameters in through the URL and it gives us our information. So a practical application of this might be you've got a web interface with a drop-down list of different customers. You choose the customer and you can dynamically build that URL. So that's how we call our different reports using URL access. Now there's this other concept called code behind strategy where you can actually embed .NET code into the report itself. For example, let's say that we had a table that displayed the employees and what their sales were. And there's a pretty wide range of values for their sales. Maybe we want to highlight the employees whose sales exceed $8,000. Well, we can embed some .NET code into the report. It's going to be a function that we embed in there, and then we can reference our function as an expression. So what we're going to do first is actually create a report that displays the employees and what kind of sales they had. And then we'll create our own custom code. Right now I don't have any reports open in my Business Intelligence Development Studio, but what I'm going to do here is right-click on Reports, and I'm just going to add a new report real quickly. I'll use that shared data source, and this will be a very simple query. Let's just right-click on here. We're going to add two tables. One is going to be the DIM employee table, and the other is going to be the fact reseller sales table. And you'll see that there's a connection between these two. So I want to display the employee key as well as the first and last name. I'll actually display the last name and then the first name, and then their sales amount. Now for each employee, there might be multiple records in the fact reseller sales, so we're actually going to do a sum of the sales amount. So right in here, I'll just say sum of that, and we'll call that total sales. Since that's an aggregate function, we need to do a group by, and we'll just group it by these three guys right here. And we'll also add in an order by. So order by the last name and then the first name. Okay, it's happy with our query. We'll just make this a tabular form and everything will go in the details. We'll call this sales by employee. Let's just take a quick preview of this report. It's very simple. We can make this numeric information look a little bit better. So just go back into design mode, right click on this guy right here, and we will look at the text box properties. And under number, we'll make that currency. We'll also use the thousand separator. Hit OK, and now we can preview it again. It's a little easier to see those values now. We have our report highlighted over here. Make sure that you are in design mode. And as soon as you get into design mode, you can go up to report and then report properties. Click on code, and this is where you enter your custom code. So I'm going to create a function. I'll call this a public shared function, and we'll say set color. And the value that's going in there is a numeric value. It's the employee's sales. So here we'll say ByVal value as integer. And then we can have a default background color. So we'll say set color equals white. And then we can say if the value is greater than 8 million, then set color equals red. End if. And then end our function. So it's a pretty straightforward function there. Now, to use this function, well, the background color that we want to highlight is this little rectangle in here. So let's right-click on it. I'm going to move over here a little bit, and let's go ahead and right-click on here, and we can go to text box properties, and we're concerned with the fill color. So instead of saying no color, we go into the expressions here, and you'll see that we have this field called total sales. If we double click on there, we're almost there. We're actually going to say equals code dot set color, passing in our field. We'll hit OK, and then OK again, and now we can test this. You see how these get highlighted? So that's very dynamic behavior. So whatever type of code you want to embed, just make sure you have a nice function in there, and when you reference your function, use the keyword code, dot, and then the function name. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all talked about the SOAP Application Programming Interface. In order to create this API, the easiest way to do this is to find the URL of the Web Services Description Language file, and you create a web service reference using that WSDL. Once you plug it in, then it will automatically generate the backend code for you. So the whole purpose of this is to remove you from all the low-level details of how things get done. Once you have the SOAP API, then you can program using either Visual Basic or C#. So in our example, we used Visual Basic. Remember to include a reference to the generated API, and then that way you don't have to fully qualify the classes that you're referencing. You can do simple tasks such as listing all of the children in your home environment. So if you want to list the data sources and who owns them, or you want to list the reports or subscriptions, it's pretty easy to do that. Be sure to go to Microsoft's website to look at the full API documentation. There's well over 100 different functions available for you. Then we talked about embedding our reports with URL access. Remember, this is going to save you on memory and performance. So if you want to have, for example, a web page that includes a report in your SSRS environment, then all you need to do is provide the necessary URL. It's going to be the main URL to access your report server, and then you tack on the name of the actual report, followed by any parameters that you need to pass in. You can even specify a different format, such as image, as opposed to displaying it in your web browser. And then the last thing we talked about was using code behind. You can create your own custom functions. You're going to define them in the code section of your report properties. And then when you want to reference that, you just use the keyword code, and then the dot operator, and the function that you created. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for